Earlier this week, the federal Auditor General concluded that the problems that have plagued the Phoenix pay system have only become worse. Mistakes that have resulted in thousands of civil servants being overpaid or underpaid have added up to about $615 million. Will the price tag keep climbing? And what is the government's fix? Carla Qualtrough is the Minister of Public Services and Procurement and Accessibility. She joins me now in studio. Hi, Minister Qualtrough. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Thank you for coming in. I want to, of course, start off by asking about the AG report into Phoenix released this week. The AG points out that the number of people with problems in March of this year is actually greater than the number of people experiencing problems getting paid last year. Are we to understand that that means that your government's plan to fix the system isn't working?
Well, I'm happy to say that since March, we've seen significant progress. So if you look at both the number of people impacted and the number of transactions in the backlog, we've seen progress. I would say probably not as much progress as I would like, but since January of this year, for example, we've gone down 100,000 transactions in the backlog. So
when can I ask you for the comparison? Because in the AG's report, it basically said, 182,000 people in March of this year were experiencing difficulties versus 144,000 of the year before. So if you're taking those kinds of numbers, like how many federal employees are dealing with issues of underpayment or overpayment or not getting paid at all right now, how much have they, if you're saying there's been progress, what's the difference?
My understanding is about 138,000 now. We've had significant progress. Significant. There's still so much work to do, so I'm very hesitant to say significant. But if you can appreciate, this time last year, I was obsessed with finding a way to stop the numbers from going up. And now I'm obsessed with finding a way to make the numbers go down quicker. And that's a much better place to be in a year.
Do you think you've stopped the bleeding? Do you think that the tide has turned? Are you certain that they won't start increasing again?
Well, unless something very unforeseen happens, I'm quite certain that we've figured out the kind of magic sauce, but it's taking quite a long time.
What is taking so long?
Well, we've moved to a pod model of managing pay in HR, and it's been very effective. What we're doing is kind of moving batches of federal departments, one kind of group of them at a time, into a different way of processing. Say for example, the first batch was last December. For those 5 departments, their backlog has gone down 40%. Overall, we've got about 50% of our employees in pods. And they've gone down about 20% in the backlog. The challenge is getting everybody into a pod. So we're hoping that by between March and May of next year, everyone will be in a pod, and we'll start seeing significant decrease.
What's significant decrease? Like when, because I understand that these are very specific numbers we're dealing with, but I think for an audience at home, the question is does it become zero? Yeah,
well, I can't tell you when it becomes zero, to be honest with you. And what I can tell you is now we're at a position where every month, every new transaction that's coming in is dealt with. Like, we're meeting our service standards. So we're not increasing the backlog. So if you get a transaction into the system today, it will be dealt with and it won't become a problem for you.
Although a backlog does still exist.
The backlog from previous, so we're chipping away at the backlog while we're committed to making sure it doesn't increase. There's no new transactions going into it. For departments that are in the pod model, they've seen a 20% decrease. They're making their monthly targets and they've decreased their backlogs by 20%. So, for example, the group that was 40, the math, I'm trying to make it simple, but the math is tough, right? The group of departments that came in last December, they're down 40%. So what I think will happen with the system, as it will be stabilized kind of on a rolling basis. There won't be a day at which point everything is satisfied, but you will see the first 5 departments have no backlog, and then the next 4 departments have no backlog, and then the next 6 departments have no backlog, and then, over time, we'll get to a point where everybody is at meeting just the normal service standard.
How much has your government spent so far on this fix?
We have spent a heck of a lot of money. It is over $1 billion, including money that went in this year in about $400 million in our budget, both to look at stabilizing the current system and to start work on the next generation of system.
So it's $1 billion, more than $1 billion so far. Is there a cap for how much you're willing to spend?
There's no cap in the sense that we are willing to spend whatever it takes to make sure people get paid, but we have to spend it responsibly and carefully and cleverly, for lack of a better word. We can't just keep dumping money into ideas that don't work. And we think we've found a great idea in pods, but we're working on other things. So how do we automate more processes? Right now, the biggest challenge remains retroactive pay. So we know we don't and haven't had the confidence of public servants to input their kind of acting pay or their vacation pay or extra pay beyond their base pay. But every time a transaction becomes old or retroactive, it's harder for the system to deal with it quickly because it becomes a manual transaction. So when people input their transactions on time, 99% of the time it's dealt with correctly. But as soon as it becomes an old transaction, there's more likelihood that the system won't like it.
The AG says that this is a significant blemish on your government's record. Do you agree?
I don't think it's, I wouldn't call it a blemish. I mean, we're trying desperately to fix it. I wish we could have fixed it. I wish we could have found some magic bullet to fix it quicker.
Do you wish you hadn't greenlit it? Does your government wish that you hadn't greenlit it?
I personally don't think we greenlit it. I think that decision was made before we came into office.
The AG said that you greenlit it.
I appreciate his perspective on that, but the way I've come to appreciate it is we were advised that it was okay to go ahead, and so we went ahead. Again, I wish we had the information now that we had then. Certainly, we probably wouldn't have said, okay, it's okay, but it was in progress. It wasn't an option, as I've said many times, between stopping it and going back to the old system. There literally wasn't an old system to go back to.
But I think the AG's point was that you didn't necessarily, you could have paused for longer. You could have, the AG at least ascertains that there was the information available to you to decide at that point not to green light the project.
And that's
he does a separate one looking at the previous government, but he does hone in on.
And I respect that, and I think that there was a lot of things we could have done better. Absolutely.
You mentioned the amount of money that not just has been spent on the fix, but also looking at what's next.
Yeah.
When will that decision be made? And can you tell us what has been decided so far?
Yeah, well, nothing's been decided so far, except that we are committed to learning from the lessons from the first system. So whether it be we will never turn off this system until we are absolutely confident that any new system works. We're not going to do that. Whether it's we're going to make sure we have proper training and change management in place, like all the things around it that every report have told us in the former government we all should have done. We're looking at kind of innovative solutions. This might not be a one-size-fits-all. The Treasury Board President and his team have the lead on that. He's probably a better person to talk about the details with, but I certainly know about the system. And from my part, my job is to get this one stabilized and make sure the data I have to give to the new system is clean, because we can't start a new system with bad data.
Is your government working with a date at which you will decide?
No.
So there is no, because I ask because I imagine there are a lot of people who are watching, who work in government, who have experienced these problems. I mean, 138,000, as you said, wondering, what's next. A fix gets us so far, but what's next? And you're saying we can't tell you, and we don't know when we will.
Well, we can't tell you. I mean, it will have to be done prudently, and we have to make sure we get it right. And things are being tested as early as kind of this fall, next spring. But in terms of when are we going to have the newly functioning in-place HR to pay system, I can't give you a date on that. I just wouldn't be responsible of me.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Minister Qualtrough. Appreciate your time.